So I finished the second book in the Cthulhu Casebooks series, titled Sherlock Holmes and the Miskatonic Monstrosities. And I'd say that I enjoyed it. It is a continuation of the first book, which I have commented on in a previous video. And if I should say that if you enjoyed the first book, you will also enjoy this one. That's true to a certain extent, but yeah, with one sort of caveat. So I'll try to avoid any spoilers, but there's one aspect of this book that it's useful to be aware of before you start reading it, which is that this book is really two books. There's one book about Sherlock Holmes, and then there's one separate book which concerns events in the United States. And this second book is sort of written in the style of a Lovecraft novel, at least as I remember them. It's quite a few years since I actually read through the stories of Lovecraft, but this one reads quite a lot like one of those stories. So I guess if you're interested in Sherlock Holmes appearing in the world of Lovecraft, you would not be adverse to Lovecraft-like story. So this book sort of being two different stories. Well, it's not two different stories. They are related, of course, but this book being divided into two separate storylines shouldn't really be a problem if you enjoy Sherlock Holmes and Lovecraft in general. But of course, if you go in expecting the book, which is quite long, it had over 400 pages. So if you go in sort of expecting it to be 400 pages of Sherlock Holmes, then you might be somewhat disappointed, but knowing what you will get should be sort of sufficient for being able to fully enjoy this book, which I found to be enjoyable. And if you sort of shortly take a short look at these two parts of the book, then the Sherlock Holmes part of the book, I found that to be perhaps a step up from the first book, which I also enjoyed. There's less sort of explanation and introduction to both the world of Lovecraft and Sherlock Holmes. So the story more or less gets going right away, and I found that to be a positive. And as for the Lovecraft-like story, that one is also very much sort of in the spirit of stories of Lovecraft, and set in very sort of familiar environments and settings. And yes, it's overall a very enjoyable novel. So I can recommend if you're not put off by the story not being 100% based on what Sherlock Holmes is doing. And with that sort of short introduction out of the way, let's do a quick detective review of this book. So there are 3 points I look at. Firstly, whether it's a book starring action hero Sherlock Holmes. Secondly, if it's a book where it pays to pay attention, where there's a payoff if you pay attention, such as being able to determine who the villain or sort of guilty person is. And thirdly, whether there's some actual detecting going on and not simply just running around. And as to these 3 points, well, the first one, this is not really, at least not for the Sherlock Holmes part and action hero story. There is some running around, of course, but there's much more of it's sort of more detective type of elements. So he goes around interviewing witnesses and following clues and deducting based on what he observes. So there's also some detecting going on in this story. As to whether it's pays to pay attention, yes, to a certain extent. There is some possibility, perhaps, of being able to deduce the ending if one really pays attention. I'm not sure if there are that many hints provided in the book, so it will perhaps be more of guesswork rather than sort of being based on explicit clues, but perhaps I didn't really catch on to what was going on before the very end, but yes, a more observant reader might perhaps be able to do that. So yes, this book follows the first one quite in the same style. If you sort of ignore the Lovecraftian part of the book first, this book series is sort of appears to be based on the premise of what would happen if Sherlock Holmes lived in a Lovecraft-like world, and this is what we get. And as one might assume, the result is not really Sherlock Holmes being curled up in a corner crying to himself. No, it's more him going at it at a sort of very rational and very thought out way. So this is perhaps, I think, part of the reason why this book is structured like this. This is, of course, pure speculation on my part, but one comment I had on the first book was that well, it's set in a sort of horror-like setting with the world having creatures from the Lovecraft universe, but it also has Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson and his brother Mycroft, and it's told very much like a Sherlock Holmes story, which means that, well, you're not telling the story of a sort of isolated person that's placed in horrific circumstances and has to sort of go through horrifying experiences. You have Sherlock Holmes and Watson bantering with each other, and to a great extent, sort of combating the foes they run into and challenges they meet, very much like Sherlock Holmes and Watson perhaps would approach these challenges if the enemies had been of a more mundane variety. So you would perhaps have the expectation that the book would be sort of a horror story, but with a Sherlock Holmes character as the main character and story told like it's a Sherlock Holmes story, well, that perhaps becomes a challenge. You see the same thing in this Sherlock Holmes The Awakened game I'm playing through. It's just so far not really been scary. There have been some, I don't know, sort of environments where the atmosphere is somewhat oppressive, but overall it hasn't really been a scary game. And part of that is sort of the main character being Sherlock Holmes, who is not easily broken and made to be scared. So there's a challenge here. If you want to write what might be expected to be a scary story and still have it concern Sherlock Holmes, you might have a challenge. I'm not saying it can't be done, but you have the challenge of doing this in an efficient way. And my speculation is that perhaps this way of structuring the book is one way of, well, to a certain extent, addressing that, because this part of the book that concerns different set of characters than Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, and that's told like it would be a Lovecraft story. It, to a much greater extent, contains sort of Lovecraftian horror elements and several quite, well, let's see, horrific scenarios and events. So it kind of provides the scariness one might expect from a book set in the Lovecraft universe. But of course, it doesn't contain Sherlock Holmes, so that's kind of the limitation you perhaps run into when you're writing a book like this. But it's an interesting way to solve it, and look at the two parts separately. The Lovecraftian part of the story, or the sort of Lovecraftian novel-like part of the story, was enjoyable by itself, and the Sherlock Holmes part of the book was also enjoyable. Of course, the two stories are connected, but looking at each separately, they also are enjoyable by themselves. So you could probably take the Lovecraft-like part of the book and publish it as a separate story, and it would more or less stand on its own. So it's a sort of interesting and enjoyable Lovecraftian tale. And apart from this, at the end of the book, sort of everything ties together, and I'm not going to say what actually happens, but there's a sort of interesting revelation at the end of the book, and it, to a certain extent, makes it obvious why the author chose to do it this way. If you are going to write a story about Sherlock Holmes in the Lovecraft universe, well, then structuring the 3 first novel as they appear to be is perhaps, well, natural way to do it. So I haven't read the last book yet, so I don't just know what happens in the 3rd part, but looking at the first and the second one, after having read the second one, then it's okay, it's sort of obvious why it's structured as it is. I'm not thinking about this second book being sort of divided into 2 parts, but more sort of the overall story arc of the three books. So that was interesting, and there is a 4th book, I think, that will come out later this year, but this next novel that I still haven't read yet, the 3rd one, is well, at least appears to sort of provide closure for this first trilogy, first 3 books. So I will probably be reading that next, and I look forward to see how the author sort of ends this story. It'll be interesting to see what the 4th book will be about, whether it's continuation of the first 3 books or whether it's a sort of separate new storyline. It will be interesting. But so far, I was fairly satisfied with this the second book, and yes, especially the Sherlock Holmes part, I thought was a sort of step up from from the first book, even though I also enjoyed the first book. So if this sounds interesting, yes, then I can recommend also this one. And that, I think, was most of what I wanted to say. So with that, I'll end it here, and I will probably be back when I have read the last book. But until then, goodbye, and goodbye. Bye-bye.